Well,
Okay.
hi, Edla, and thank
Hi,
you
Jenny.
so much for joining us.
Oh, yes, yes. How are you?
I'm good. How are you
Good,
doing?
good.
We were just chatting before we went live that you're still at the beach,
Yeah.
which is nice, and the flexibility that you have to be able to do that is important.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. It's kind of cloudy here today, but it's okay. It's not very busy at the beach this time of year, so it's great.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to have you here today, and you're also going to do a guest expert in the Brave Trauma Therapist Collective
Yeah.
in June, so that'll be in a few months.
Hmm.
But I want you to kind of tell everyone who you are, what are you doing, and then we're going to dive right into your 180 bookend technique, which is so relevant for so many of us right now.
Yeah, yeah. It's a great technique to use in a bunch of different ways. And actually, it was sort of an outgrowth of some work that I was doing as a parent counselor. So I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor in North Carolina. I have a private practice where I see children and adults. And at one point, my sort of personal and private lives sort of they collided where I was doing this work for the school system, some parent counseling work, and also my father started to have some challenges.
Mhm.
So I began to see that some of the things that I was doing as a parent counselor, parent educator, if I modified some of those strategies that I was giving to these parents of young children, I could use them for my aging parents. And
Wow.
so then I continued my private practice and I continued that work and I cared for my parents for over 10 years. And I what I realized during that time is that there's a lot of information out there about financial issues or getting support with writing wills or assisted living considerations, those types of things. But there wasn't very much about how to handle the day-to-day challenges,
Mhm.
the day-to-day upsets, the day-to-day worries, the day-to-day complaints. And so I really began doing a lot of research and did a lot of work so that I could make my caretaking journey with my parents less stressful, more effective, more connected, so that I wasn't so frustrated with them all the time. And then my mother passed in 2021, and I just felt like this is something that I want, everything that I had learned, I wanted to pay forward,
Yeah.
which is where the bookend technique, I thought, let me write this up and start giving it to people. And then I've got some other things that are going on as well. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing that your some of your own story too. I think that as therapists, I mean, one, we're taught to not talk about ourselves, to not self-disclose, even in non-clinical spaces. But also, I told you a little bit about my journey. I actually was a caregiver for my dad in my 20s. When
Right.
I was 25, I had to start taking care of my dad. I was his power of attorney, medical, durable, all the things. And I was in grad school at the time.
Wow.
And I think that at the time I was so young and naive, and I had more instrumental support around me because I was still in my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't really occur to me to naturally use a lot of the things I was learning as I was becoming a psychologist as I was taking care of my dad, even though it makes so much sense. And so
Right.
being able to share this information and these journeys with a therapist audience, like in this Facebook group, I think is really important because I think a lot of times we think we have to keep our personal and our professional lives totally separate, and that if there's any overlap, it's dangerous. But
Right.
when we do it in supported and containered ways, it's a superpower for us and for the people in our lives. And so I think that that is something that you're really touching on in the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I think, and I agree, the self-disclosure is always sort of a tricky line. But what I find with my clients, with everybody, they need to feel there needs to be some level of authenticity and some level of connectedness. And I think for me personally, I just don't work like that as a therapist. If it's too stoic and it's too hands off, I feel like they can tell that. They don't know everything about me, but they
Right.
know enough to be able to say, oh, she can really relate, especially when it's in this arena, right?
Yep.
Especially when it's in this arena, which is really more almost like coaching than it is
Hmm.
therapy, because many of the people, if they've got a lot of pre-existing or trauma issues or that kind of thing, then I would refer them certainly to therapy before we would get into the coaching. But I think your audience is all therapists, right?
Therapists, helpers, and healers in this
Right, right.
Facebook group. Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of them, when I talk about this, it's just like you said, you didn't think about going, oh, I didn't think about using the skills that I have in my
Hmm.
own personal life, right? In this
Right.
capacity. And so I think some of the things that I'm talking about is they're just going to go, oh, why didn't I?
I
That's,
know, right?
it's
And
so
then
obvious. Yeah, yeah. So yeah. But still I think the framework is a really easy way to place to start from. In
yep.
therapy, we're always kind of this act as if, right? Sometimes you have to just go for it and you act as if and you just take one step forward, right? And
Yeah.
then eventually you look back and you're like, wow, I'm feeling a lot better. I've made a lot of progress. And so
Mhm.
this is just a framework that, like anything, when you start doing it, it feels a little awkward because you got to find your voice. But if you learn the steps, then you can apply it. And it's another thing that's really different. Like, I don't, was your dad sick? Is that why did he have cancer or something?
No, well, so he was an addict, he had severe mental illness,
Okay,
and eventually he just wasn't able to live independently in a
I
safe
gotcha.
way. And so that we transitioned him into an assisted living place in Boulder, Colorado that was really kind of non unconventional. It's a very
Right.
Boulder place.
Yep.
And he ended up having a really serious injury there because
Oh,
of what happened. And so then that sent us on this additional like medical journey of like one medical problem after another. But
right.
it more started out of his addiction and serious mental illness. And then it snowballed, which I think happens with a lot of people, regardless of where the journey begins.
Right.
Things start to pile on top of each other.
Yes, and that was one thing I was going to say. It can be, it has to be tailor made a little bit because if someone's battling cancer, then that's a little bit different conversation. If you're sandwiched between raising your own kids and your parents, that's a little different. Say if you've only got 25 years of life experience under your belt, that adds another layer. So though there's some commonalities between all of this caring and how to engage the people that you're caring for, you have to really consider these extraneous circumstances and
Yeah.
their temperament. I mean, that's
Yeah.
a big one, which I don't talk too much about that in the bookend technique, but that's something in my program that I talk a lot about is how does your parents or elderly loved ones, whoever you're taking care of, how does their temperament
Hmm.
impact your ability to get them to be reasonable
Yeah. No,
and
totally.
to make your conversations with them successful and
Yeah.
empowering. So yeah.
Well, we could talk about this forever, I
Yeah,
think. I
we
have so
could.
many
Yeah.
things I could talk to you about, but I want to know what your bookend technique is because I don't know it yet either. I purposely didn't look it up because I want to learn it straight from
Oh,
you.
good. Yeah. Well, I always, I started doing this a lot when we started going online, and I think of it as bookends. Like there's the first bookend, and then there's the books, and then there's the back bookend.
Hmm.
So the way when you use the bookend technique is when your parents are snarky, complaining, whining, crying, pick a, you know, pick a complaint, right? So they're like,
Right.
wah, 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 blah, 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 right? So the first thing you do, big shocker, is empathic listening and reflecting their feelings.
Well, you're
So
preaching to the choir,
I
right? You're
know,
preaching to a group
but
who's
if you
like, all
think of
right.
right, and so if you think about it, and I'll give an example as I'm going through this. So my mother, like at this time, she was like 82, and she calls me and says she wants to go to Mexico. Well, my inside voice is going, "What? Are you flipping kidding me?" But my outside voice, who has learned, says, "It sounds like it's really important for you to go to Mexico." She wanted to go see one of her grandchildren. I was like, that would be really fun. So it's just
Mhm.
empathic listening, expressing her feelings. Because what am I doing? I'm getting her nervous system regulated,
Totally.
right? So the first step is to get that nervous system regulated by being empathic, by reflecting their feelings, even if you think it's the most cockamamie thing you have ever heard them say, right?
Yep.
And then the middle part, kind of where the books would be, that's the second part. And once you've regulated their nervous system, then you can do some inquiring. How do you think that would happen? Now where do you want to go in Mexico? And how
Hmm.
long do you want to stay? And how do you want to get there? I might not ask that many questions that fast, but do
Hmm.
some inquiring. And then they'll say, well, I can go in June, and I could do this, and I could ride on an airplane. I'm still thinking, how do you think you're going to get on an airplane? But I don't say any of that. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, those are good ideas. Would you like me to look into it? Right. So it's just going on this journey with them and listening to what they have to say. And
Yep.
so then I was able to come back and say, well, the ticket's going to cost this much, because I knew my mother's temperament, and she's cheap. She didn't want to spend any money. So I told her
Mm-hmm.
how much it was going to cost, and I just did it in a matter of fact way. And then I, said, okay, you're gonna have to go from point A to point B to get to the terminal from the parking lot, and I just started painting this picture of the reality without going, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Right.
And then I said, you think about it and let me know, right? And then the back end bookend is encourage and affirm. So she came back to me and said, I really don't want to spend that much money. I think that would be too hard. I said, okay. I said, well, if that's fine, if that's what you want to do. I said, you really wanted to go, and then I'm affirming and listening. You
Yep.
really wanted to go. You were really excited about it, but you kind of came to the realization that just wasn't realistic. I think that was, you spent a lot of time thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was that took a long time, right? Because I had to do that over several days, but it's the same thing.
Yep.
Why didn't the trash man pick up the trash cans today? I mean, they'll call you. I don't know if you've dealt with this, but it's like, I can't get the remote to work. The trash man didn't come today. Uh,
Yep.
Pick a thing. So
Yep.
you just go, it's really frustrating you that the trash truck didn't come today. I
Mm-hmm.
wonder why they didn't come. Oh, I don't know. This is like a real story too. My dad, he couldn't stand it when the trash truck didn't come on the right day. Then he was able to go, well, maybe it was because it was a holiday. And then, you wrap back up with that affirming. Because really, when people get older and they've been functioning adults, we think we can just tell them, don't do that. That's not
Right.
a good idea. But can you tell a 2-year-old that? No. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of similarities. People really want to feel heard.
Mm-hmm.
They want to feel understood.
Yep.
They will, if you do that, they'll often come to their own realization of what's practical and what's not.
Yep.
And then in my program, I get into more like, if that doesn't work, then how do you set a limit, and, so forth and so
Right.
on. But I think, I would say, for a lot of the sort of day-to-day things, this 3-step process works so great. I'm giving you sort of the condensed version, but it's
No,
basically
totally.
reflect their feelings, gather their thoughts, and then affirm their
Yep.
decisions.
I mean, I'm thinking of like so many times that I did that with my dad actually, and I didn't, have a name for it the way
Right,
that you've designed it.
right.
But I can think of some really specific examples too. And I think what you said also about kind of like shifting our mindset with our older loved ones to thinking about, especially for folks who've had kids or who've been around young kids, of
Mm-hmm.
thinking about some of their needs similar to that of like a toddler. Not, and I know you don't do this, it's not
Right.
about infantilizing our older
No.
adults, but of just the mindset shift in terms of
Right.
like the kinds of things and the kinds of communication that are needed.
Correct.
Because, our brains they only grow, our bodies only grow for so long until they start to deteriorate. And so their cortexes, I imagine, are not working as well as when they were. And so
Right.
they need more of that structure, more of that reassurance.
And that's part of the thing when I started really digging into all of this and doing a lot of research. I was struck by, as a parent counselor with the school system, I learned a lot about child development, right? So that I could then teach the parents,
Right.
this is kind of normal for a 3-year-old. This is kind of what they do. I mean, it's not
Right.
fun, but it's kind of
Exactly.
how they are. And
Right.
so I really dug into the developmental stages of the aging population. And I talk a lot about that also, because you're
Mm.
exactly right. The brain only, it can function to its full capability, and then it begins to age, and it just
Yeah.
isn't able to do some of the things that it was able to do before.
Yeah.
So people have this misconception. It's like, okay, well, they're 80, but they didn't do that when they were 65. Well, that's 15 years. That,
Exactly.
that's a lot changes in that 65 to 80-year-old,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yep. Yeah.
So but I think too, even for us as adults, that, I mean, if I'm frustrated about something, I like for somebody to like hear me and
Right?
act like they understand what I'm talking about. And then I
Right?
would, and then I'll generally come to a pretty good conclusion. And then I like for somebody to say, you really thought that through? That was a good idea. I mean, come on. I think we can all benefit, but it has to be real intentional. And I think for maybe this audience, it makes a lot of sense. But if you think about someone that doesn't have any of this training or
Mhm.
even understand any basic brain science, which I teach a lot about that too, just basic brain science about how to recognize when someone is in sort of their fight or flight state. If they're whining, crying, any of those things, their brain is not emotionally, they're not emotionally regulated, and you
Right.
have to regulate them first. And the way
Right.
to do that is to be empathic and
Yeah.
to honor their feelings. So,
Yep.
um, yeah, it's hard to teach this in one little thing because I'm like, well, there's this and
Well,
there's
so
this.
tell us, you have another like opportunity for people to work with you
Yeah,
for you have an event coming up and then you
I
have a
do.
program too. So tell us
Yeah.
about these things.
Well, first of all, I want to say that the bookend technique, I did put it in an 11-page workbook where it's got like specific examples and
Nice.
specific things to say in a script. So if you all are interested in that, you go to my website, edlaprevette.com, and there's a tab at the top that says free guide. So you can get
Okay.
that.
Okay.
But actually, this Sunday, I'm going to do an informational event for the group program that I'm going to do in April. I'm going to run it as a beta program. And if you don't know, a beta program is when it's significantly cheaper than a full
Mhm.
program because I'm working out all the kinks and the tech piece. But I'm going to do an informational Sunday, and you can sign up for that on my website where I just talk about what's the program like, how much does it cost, what things are you going to cover, all of and I'll talk about the bookend technique a little bit. And then the actual group program will start April 7th, and it's going to run for 4 weeks. And
Cool.
it'll be sort of a video, a weekly lesson, and then we'll meet to kind of elaborate on the lesson and do a Q&A and see what people are dealing with. So yeah, I'm so excited about it. I'm hoping people sign up.
Yeah, this is awesome. Well, you have a link directly to the informational session, right?
Yeah, the easiest way, I have everything. If you just go to my homepage, Edla
Okay.
Prevette, because that's enough to remember. And there's right at the top, there's a place to sign up for the informational system.
Okay. Well, and
So
I'll make sure to add these links on the videos as well. So
yeah, I
that's why I
can
was
give you the
asking.
direct link, but it's the button's right there at the top of the
Okay.
website. So that might
All
be the
right.
easiest. Yay. Yeah,
Cool. That's
yeah, this
awesome.
is great. It was nice talking to you. Any other things you want to chat about?
I mean, like I said, I feel like I could talk for like
Yeah,
forever with you about this, especially someone who's been through it. And now sort of I I don't know, I can like see it on the horizon in some ways again.
yeah,
And so it can be a really it's a challenging time, but I think there's a lot of beauty in being in the sandwich generation and
yeah.
in caring for our older adults too in our
It really
lives.
can be, and that's why I want to. A lot of people don't hop on this until there's a crisis, right?
Right.
But I think if you start now, even
Yeah.
as you become an adult, if people go ahead and start, then their relationship with their parents can evolve.
Yeah.
And so then it doesn't become so contentious because I've seen that so many times. There's just so much conflict, right?
Yep.
And then they get to the point that, people become estranged. And
Yep.
so when you can have these conversations and get started sooner than later, then the journey's it's a lot more, I won't say pleasurable, but you feel like the last years of your parents' or loved ones' lives, it's more in a loving place rather than
Yeah.
a stressful place. So yeah,
Yeah, you're more connected. You
yes,
are on more or less the same page.
hmm,
You're working together even though you're doing different things.
right, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It feels better, I think, than
Yeah.
like the guilt that you have to deal with if you're when you're relieved that they die, which
Right.
that relief that people feel and they feel so
Yeah.
guilty. Anyway, but
Yeah.
yeah, this was fun. This was such an unexpected, we just started chatting the other day and here we are.
I know. Well, I'm so grateful for it. Thank you
Yeah,
for sharing everything with us
sure.
today. And I've learned so much as well, just
Good.
even from this interaction. So I
Good,
can't
good.
wait to talk to you again soon.
All right.
And thank you. Let me